Good evening. My name is Susan Waterman, and it is my honor to welcome you to the Windsor County Democratic Committee's 2022 Secretary of State Candidate Forum. This evening, candidates Sarah Copeland Hanzas, John Odum, and Chris Winters will share with us their vision for the Vermont Secretary of State's office. We did attempt to reach out to Wyatt Poland, a fourth candidate, but were unable to connect with him. The questions to be asked this evening were submitted by residents of Windsor County. Thank you to each person who took the time to submit questions ahead of time. And we will also be selecting some questions from the YouTube live stream chat this evening, so please get your questions ready. These questions have not been supplied to the candidates or their staff ahead of time, so they will be hearing them along with you in real time. Facilitating along with me this evening is Dottie Deans, who will be keeping track of each speaker's time to ensure that each candidate's opportunity for communication remains equitable. At the end of the evening, please take a moment at the conclusion of this evening's forum to visit the link in the description below the video to make a donation to the Windsor County Committee. Your donations will help us to continue the important work we're doing here in Windsor County. Each candidate will now have 2 minutes to introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into the questions. We'll start with this alphabetically. So Sarah, please take a couple of moments to tell us about yourself.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm Sarah Copeland Hanzas, and I'm honored to be Zooming to Windsor County tonight to talk about why I want to be Vermont's next Secretary of State. Never before has democracy been under such threat, from intentional misinformation to active voter suppression to elections deniers actively trying to infiltrate secretaries of state offices across the country. This form of government that we know is in real peril. I grew up in Corinth and Bradford in a politically diverse family. We watched the 6 o'clock news and argued over politics at the dinner table. I graduated from Oxbow High School, where my mentors were Bruce McLean, who instilled a love of debate in our raging class discussions, Fred Rubenfeld, who showed me the beauty of our pristine landscape, as well as how we can step up to solve environmental crises, and Mona Garone, who taught me to see the whole playing field, assess the strengths of both teams, and how to outsmart and outwork your opponent. I studied at the University of Vermont, got my teaching certificate at Upper Valley Educator Institute, and taught science in Corinth and Bradford. When my kids were born, I was able to stay home with them for 8 years. 3-to-1 student-teacher ratio, it's the way to go. In 2004, I ran for the legislature and stepped into the political arena in the backlash against civil unions. Knowing how divisive the issue was did not daunt me because I felt committed to making sure we achieved full marriage equality in Vermont. I am proud that we accomplished that in 2009, and even more proud that we didn't lose a seat in the House after that historic vote. Thank you, Mona, for reminding me how important it is to see the whole playing field. In my 18 years in the legislature, I've fought through many issues that protect the health and safety of Vermonters. I want to take the passion and skills that I've developed in my time in the legislature to fight for democracy in Vermont. We need to get back to the family dinner table, learn how to talk to each other again. I'm honored to be here tonight and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I appreciate your time and your introduction. So next, we'll have John.
Hello, and thanks for having me. Just a note on what's behind me. The most remote place in my house is my oldest son's room. So I hope you appreciate the decor. I'm sorry you're not here to appreciate the incense, but it's, anyways. So yes, my name is John Odum. I am the elected city clerk in Montpelier. I have been for 10 years. City clerks, I like to tell people, handle much of what the Secretary of State does at a completely different neighbor-to-neighbor level, in the sense that we license locally, we have our land records and city archives, and of course we run elections. And I think you'll see historically over the last few decades, there tends to be a rollover, a change. 10 years ago, Jim Condos, before that, Deb Markowitz, where you get a new face coming along who really reimagines the office in some ways. And I'm here to hopefully convince you all that I'd be the next person to do that. Myself, I did not grow up in Vermont. I'm actually a native Kentuckian. I grew up a working class hillbilly on the edge of the on the edge of the Kentucky Appalachians. I've lived in Vermont for about 26 years with my wife and two now adult children, despite the decor. And I've been deeply, deeply involved in Democratic politics. It's nice to talk to a Democratic group. You all are my people. Some of you who've been around for a while may remember that I worked for the state party back in 99, 2000, 2001, which was my first political job after working as an organizer for Bernie Sanders against Susan Sweetser. I went on from there. I've done work for VNRC, for Planned Parenthood. I actually was the field director for the Clavel for Governor campaign, and I have stories if you ever want to hear them. And I have been the Washington County chair twice over the last 20 years.
I lost track of my time. It's 2 minutes is up, so maybe if you could finish it up in a sentence.
Well, I think I've talked about myself already more than I'm usually comfortable. So
my apologies.
I thought I was getting a long time there.
Thank you, John. Chris, could you come on and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Susan. And thanks for being here, everyone. And thanks for giving us this opportunity tonight. My name is Chris Winters. I'm the Deputy Secretary of State to Jim Kondos, and I'm running to be your next Secretary of State. When Jim told me he was retiring, I knew I had to step up because I know how much is at stake having been a partner in this work. The challenges we face today are like nothing we've seen before. Election integrity is under attack. Nationally, access to voting is being restricted in ways we couldn't have even imagined just a few years ago. Yet here in Vermont, we've been expanding the right to vote. And we're a national leader in elections and in the many other important services Vermonters and Vermont businesses rely on from our office every single day. Vermont needs an experienced and effective leader with a track record of results. I'm doing this work for Vermont. I have the experience, and I'm committed to using that experience, my 25 years of public service in the Secretary of State's office, including the last 7 as Deputy Secretary, to ensure that we'll uphold that excellence and we'll build on it. As the first person in my family to go to college and the father of 4 children, I'm driven to make our state a better place. Whether that's as a state employee, a school board chair, or a baseball coach, I want to solve problems and I want to be of service. I'm running as a problem solver who's done the job. I'm running as a public servant who wants this job, is committed to this office, and is dedicated to this work. And I'm in this race because Vermont needs a competent, compassionate, and qualified manager in the Secretary of State's office. As the Deputy Secretary, I'm doing the work now, and I'll be ready to lead on day one. And I'll keep the lights on. I have to fix my light now that just went off.
All right. Thank you, Chris. All right. Well, wonderful introductions, everyone. You all come from a diverse experience background. So this first question is going to allow for you to expand on that. What experience or background do you have that makes you the best qualified candidate for the role of Secretary of State? And we will start with John on this question.
Well, as I mentioned, I've been city clerk for 10 years. City clerk is the neighbor-to-neighbor equivalent, analog, you could say, to the Secretary of State's office. I think, as I mentioned, we do neighbor-to-neighbor licensing. We work on the elections hands-on in a neighbor-to-neighbor way, and our archives are provided for our communities, maintained by us. And I think that neighbor-to-neighbor approach that only a municipal clerk has would be a terrific element to bring up to the top office, up to the Secretary of State's office. As far as my own work qualifications for the job, I am nationally recognized in election cybersecurity. I am on the advisory board of the University of Chicago's Cyber Policy Initiative. The Cyber Policy Initiative, among other things, puts on an annual event at the largest hacker conference in the world where we hack voting machines. And I am a certified ethical hacker, which is a professional credential. I can say firsthand what the dangers are, what sort of attacks hackers and foreign actors will use against voting systems in the country and in Vermont. And I can tell you right off that there are some things we could be doing very differently. In fact, there are some things that we could lead the world in, frankly. Vermont, Jim, Chris, they've done a great job within the current paradigm. But the current paradigm, if you want to compare it to a gasoline guzzling car, needs to change in a fundamental way to an electric vehicle. And I hope for the opportunity to get into that. I am also a certified municipal clerk, and I hold
Thank you, John.
an election administration certification from the University of Minnesota.
Thank you, John. Same question, Chris, to you.
Okay, thank you. As I mentioned in my opening, I served about 25 years in the Secretary of State's office. I started out there as a staff attorney in the Office of Professional Regulation and worked my way up to be the Director of Professional Regulation and then the Deputy Secretary 7 years ago. I'm now fire tested through the COVID challenges we all faced in 2020. It was the greatest professional challenge of my career. We worked very hard under pressure to do a completely successful vote by mail election for the first time on a short runway with record voter turnout. I know this office inside and out. I'm the legislative lead for the agency. I head up HR. I oversee the budget. I oversee IT, and on and on. I'm the records officer for the agency. I'm the communications lead as well. The Secretary of State's office is no longer a quiet, sleepy little agency that gets busy with elections every other year. The stakes have really changed. The pressure is constant. And it's important to remind people that this office is not just about elections. The Office of Professional Regulation serves a huge and important purpose in protecting the public from professional harm from 50 different professions and 80,000 licensees. And I built a system there that is now a nation-leading system and the envy of other states. We have the Safe at Home program, protecting women and children from their abusers as a confidential address system. We have municipal assistance, open meetings, public records, the state archives, business registration, and on and on. So I have done all of the work. I am doing the work. I know this agency. I'm committed to this work, and I'm ready to go on day one should I be your next Secretary of State.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Sarah, what experience makes you the best qualified candidate for the role?
Well, I have 18 years of experience in the legislature representing rural Eastern Orange County, where we have a diverse population of folks who have different ideas and different concerns and different priorities. And I have successfully represented them for 9 terms in the State House. In that time, I have fought for bipartisan legislation, including post-traumatic stress coverage for first responders, a tripartisan sexual harassment prevention bill that was called the strongest in the nation in that Me Too moment. And as a small business owner during my time in the legislature, I also led on paid sick days. I always supported raising the minimum wage because, you know, my bottom line should make room for what's right for my employees. I also supported paid family leave, and wouldn't our experience during COVID have been much different if we had a functional paid family leave program when we headed into this global pandemic. Other things that I've worked on that I think established that I know how to bring people together around complex issues. We're going to talk for a minute about pension reform. Pension reform was a 15-month process that brought us into conversation with our public teachers and our state employees, a conversation about how to strengthen and make more sustainable our pension system. That was a long and grueling process, and at times it was very divisive and very difficult because it put me at odds with some of my friends and neighbors. During that time, though, I worked very hard to bring us to successful consensus around how to fix the pension system. Our pension task force was a unanimous vote. The pension bill, as it came through the legislature, was a unanimous conclusion in both the House and the Senate. And for the first time in Vermont's history, we had a unanimous override of a gubernatorial veto. And so I'm really proud of that work. And I think it demonstrates that I am out there and ready to tackle some of these deep and divisive issues, the complicated ones. And I am ready to be your next Secretary of State because I know what's coming at us when I see what is coming across the country at Secretary of State's offices.
Thank you, Sarah. So the next question is going to deal with small business. How can the Secretary of State's office help to improve the small business and entrepreneurial economy in Vermont? And for this one, we'll start with Chris.
All right, thank you. As you may know, we're the first stop for doing business in Vermont. So small businesses come and register with us. And as the Secretary of State's office, we have to ensure that business owners, especially small business owners, don't have to spend a ton of time shuffling paperwork around or fighting red tape. They need to be spending time starting and growing their businesses. I was the lone voice in government for multiple years, pushing ahead a Vermont business portal that had been an idea that had started and failed many times. And we now finally have some momentum for that. The new business portal is underway. We're rebuilding the foundation so that when we have this business portal, it'll be a one-stop shop for business interactions with government to make it as easy as possible. Right now, they can come in the front door, the virtual front door at the Secretary of State's office, register their business, get their tax ID number, and also go over to the Department of Labor for what they need. In our vision, and it's hopefully going to be completed by the end of 2022, that foundation will be rebuilt in such a way that it'll be easy for it to connect with other services in state government. So that you can get your A&R permit, or you can get your liquor license, or whatever else that you might need as a small business. So our goal is always to solve problems, to make things easier, to make things better for the people we serve. And we do that with the existing business portal, and it's going to get even better with the new and improved business portal that's coming soon.
Thank you, Chris. Next candidate is Sarah. How can the Secretary of State's office help to improve the small business and entrepreneurial economy in Vermont?
So thank you so much for that question. And thank you to Chris for reminding folks about the business portal. I used that when I was establishing my small business in Vermont as well. When I think about ways that we can support small businesses in Vermont, I'm reminded of the 70+ professions that the Secretary of State's office regulates. Many of the individuals who are licensed under the Office of Professional Regulation are sole proprietors. And I remember from my days of being a small business owner that at the end of the day, when you're tired, when you're exhausted, when you ran out of something and had to scramble to get the supplies that you needed, what falls to the wayside at the end of the day, oftentimes, is promoting your own business and making sure that you're doing that marketing to get your name out there and to draw customers. And so I would like to take the Office of Professional Regulation and turn it around to make it a more consumer-friendly portal, so that if I am living in Windsor and I'd like to hire a forester, I can actually search that portal and find who in the forestry licensed realm is practicing in my area. Because it's all well and good to be able to see a list and see, a forester who's licensed in Coventry, but that forester's not going to want to come down to Windsor to take a look at the job that you need them to look at. And so I think that it's a benefit to the small businesses, to these sole proprietors, to these Main Street businesses, to be able to give that sort of consumer focus, make sure that folks are able to access a listing of all of these professions, whether it's a mental health counselor, whether it's an architect, maybe you want to do some landscaping. I don't know, maybe you are looking for a martial arts studio. I think we ought to make that more consumer focused.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And to you, John.
Well, first of all, I think Jim and Chris deserve total kudos. They've done a great job up there with the portal, and it's nice that there's going to be more. And honestly, I think Sarah's got a terrific idea for expanding it and reorienting it. It's interesting, when I first started talking to people about running for office, I did have unexpectedly small business people in my town in Montpelier stepping up to me and letting me know ways that they would like to be more involved in a lot of how these systems are put together and developed beyond to the extent they already are. So I think in the process, I think one of the best ways to support businesses in the community is to give them a lot of room to lead the way on that. But I think another, and this is a little abstract, another way we can support businesses and new businesses is bring them into the Vermont community in a bigger way. And we can do that by using OPR as a vehicle for reaching out and bringing some of these folks together, by which I mean, for example, something like the Equal Pay Compact. This would be an extraordinarily unique vehicle to get something like the Equal Pay Compact out in front of hundreds of business people and expand that. That's just one example. The legislature has tasked the Secretary of State's office with collecting demographic information so that good public policy can be made to support women, people of color, and the entire business community. My first priority getting in would be to get the ball rolling on that, because that's something that needs to happen. So you can use OPR in some really activist ways to make the entire business community more reflective of Vermont and more healthy, I think.
Thank you, John. Okay, well, the next question is elections question. I think that's one that's commonly on everybody's mind nowadays. And we'll start with Sarah for this question. With challenges on many fronts to voter protections and elector integrity, how would you ensure the integrity of voting in Vermont?
So I always go back to what is the first line of voter integrity in Vermont, and that is our local elected clerks in municipalities across the state. And John knows this from being city clerk in Montpelier for many years. Our town and city clerks are the first line of elections administration, and they are the ones who oversee your eligibility to vote, and they are the ones who raise the flag if they see an impropriety. I think that in Vermont, we are a small state. Our clerks know many of their residents, in part because they are elected by them and need to campaign to be elected by them, and also because they deal with them on a regular basis, whether it is renewing a dog license or helping somebody look up a land record or access a birth certificate. Our town and city clerks know us, and they know who's eligible to vote. We also have really strong protections in law to make sure that if somebody's eligibility to vote is being questioned, that there is a process to evaluate that. And that provisional ballot that's offered to somebody whose voting status may be questionable is a really strong protection. In fact, when we looked back, as my committee was looking at taking our very successful 2020 universal vote by mail and making it permanent for Vermont, we looked back at the 2020 elections and we looked to see, how many instances of potential voter fraud were there? There were 7 potentials, and 6 of the 7 of them were determined to be simply a mistake of a name, John P. Smith instead of John Q. Smith. The 7th was a person who was given a provisional ballot because the city clerk in South Burlington said, I think this person has already voted by mail. And he presented himself, he insisted he needed to vote. He was offered a provisional ballot, and then an investigation ensued. And so that 7th instance of potential irregularity was determined to be somebody who was intentionally trying to test the system and intentionally looking to vote twice, which is illegal.
Thanks, Sarah.
And so I think that we have really strong protections, and I'm very happy with where we are as a state.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Same question to you, John.
Well, when we talk about, or people ask about election integrity, they're really talking about a couple things. A lot of times they're talking about voter fraud. And let me say for the record, it's just not a problem. I'm not going to say it never happens. I caught somebody once. They're up on my little trophy board, actually. But it's not an issue in terms of the security of our elections. If it were ever to become one, you'd see the clerks be the first ones in getting ahead of that and tipping that balance the other way. I think the other thing that people are worried about is having their votes count. And I think folks locally do a very good job on that. I think my fellow clerks do a fantastic job. And then the final is, of course, protection from intrusion or tampering or mischief, which generally it's a cybersecurity question. Here's where the ball is always a moving target. And here's where I would propose some real differences in our approach. You'll see, for example, that 95% of hacks in this country come from unpatched software or social engineering, viruses, things like that. You've got a lot of folks who are unsophisticated using these computers locally, a lot of election administrators, clerks, who are prime targets for that kind of vulnerability. I would like to see the Secretary of State's office provide dedicated election workstations that are only used. Nobody checks their email on it. Nobody goes surfing. And those can be managed in a secure network environment. This would be huge in taking out that vulnerability. I realize I'm almost out of time, and I hope I have the opportunity to tell you a little more about that, because I think about this an awful lot.
All right, thank you, John. We do have a question about cybersecurity later on. So,
beautiful.
All right, same question to you, Chris.
Thank you.
And I just want to clarify that the question was voter protections and elector integrity. So not just election integrity, but the electors, the elected electors for like the presidential contest.
Okay, got it. Sarah and John have covered it fairly well. I'll turn. So if you're talking about elector integrity, I think I can say I watched in horror on January 6th, like many of you did, and felt it maybe even a little more personally for me, because we and my elections team, as we had just come through the 2020 elections and worked so hard to protect the right to vote. And yet here we were with President Trump saying that the election was stolen. And you can draw a straight line between those kind of statements that he'd been making from 2016 forward to January 6th, to the death threats that we received in our office and the trauma that it caused our staff. The outright lies being told in the 2020 election were the cause of that. And I've been on the front lines receiving these calls. I've been seeing the effects that they've had. They started a long time ago. So when you talk about election integrity, it's not just about cybersecurity. It's not just about access to the ballot box. It's not just about having good laws. It's about civic engagement. It's about education. It's about transparency. It's about civil discourse. It's about media literacy. And when I look at this problem, it's a holistic problem. There's no shortcut to saving democracy. It's a battle that we have to wage daily on many fronts. And the work's not going to be done with one victory or one defeat or one election or one bill. It's going to be rooted in the sustained and informed engagement of citizens and of leaders who are committed to telling the truth, who are committed to pushing back. And as we enter another intense year, the question isn't how we're going to, not whether we're going to prevail, but how we're going to prevail. And that's left to the states now. The Supreme Court isn't going to help us. The federal government isn't going to help us. It's up to the states. And we've held the line in Vermont, and we've pushed back, and we've been leading the way, and we have to continue to lead the way. Vermont's been a beacon of hope in an otherwise dark landscape across the country. And we need to continue to lead and show other states what's possible. I've been doing that work and I want to continue to do that work for Vermont.
Thank you, Chris. So the next question, we have a couple of questions in the YouTube chat, so I'm going to take one of those. Al Alessi asked, in Woodstock, we have paper ballots that get scanned. Is that the best option for ballots? And if not, what is? And that question is going to go first to John.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the optical scanner systems. I haven't had a chance to get my hands into the new systems that we're receiving from the Secretary of State, but our previous, the ones we've been using for years, I got my hands into with some other hackers, and they were extraordinarily secure. And a lot of that is because of the optical scanning technology we use. The alternative is going to be working on things like touch screens. There's a lot of potential there for problems that are needless. So no, I think the approach, the paper ballots, and the paper backup, an intangible that it helps us with is it dramatically increases voter confidence. And because of all this, that you're seeing a push back towards paper ballots across the country. Jurisdictions, states who eliminated them before are now going the other way. So if you want, there is no better sign that we are doing this the right way as far as that goes. So yeah, go paper ballots.
Okay, thank you, John. Same question to Chris.
Yeah, thank you. The paper ballots are the gold standard. It's your receipt. It's what you can go back to if you have a problem with your machines. It's what you can go back to if you have a problem with your results. You can go back and check. Paper ballots, post-election audits. These are what all states, and that's why all states, just about all states, are now going back to paper ballots as the best form of election security. As we've seen, you can use the federal law requires that you store those ballots for 22 months after the election. So we can always go back if we discovered a problem later. After every general election, we do a post-election audit where we randomly select about 7 towns. We scan those ballots through on a different machine with a different vendor to verify that those results match up. And we've very rarely seen anything but the smallest of discrepancies. And usually those are explainable. So I think we're the envy of other states in that we have paper ballots. We have things like same-day registration, automatic voter registration, ballot curing now, and vote by mail. Vermont really has been the gold standard, and that's why we're ranked #1 by MIT's Election Performance Index. You're on mute, Susan.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yes, thank you, Chris. And Sarah, if you could answer the same question for us, please.
Absolutely. I totally believe that that the paper ballot is the way to go. It gives voters the confidence that they know that they're leaving a document that is traceable. And I really believe that it gives us much more precision in terms of determining who actually won any given election. I was honored to participate in a recount of a race that was an Orange Windsor House race. You may remember the Tunbridge Royalton district seemed to have a run there for a while of being decided by just a handful of votes. And I participated in the recount where we looked to see what the voters actually intended. And we had the physical ballots in our hand. We went through the recount process. We determined who the winner was. And we had that paper ballot in front of us to be able to understand exactly what was intended by the voter. So I really, I think that Vermont voters appreciate the history of having that paper ballot in front of their hands, and I think it gives us a much better ability to go back and do those recounts. And I've been really pleased to see that when we do recounts, that the vote margin doesn't change by more than just a couple of votes based on whether a ballot might have been unreadable by the optical scanner and therefore rejected. And so I think paper ballots is the way to go, and I think Vermonters will have faith in that going forward.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, we're going to switch gears away from elections for another question. Vermont's open meetings law helps to maintain transparency in government. How well do you think most municipalities adhere to this law? And do you think the technology challenges within some municipalities impede Vermonters' ability to access mandated records? And we'll start with Chris on this one.
Sure, thank you. I was the kind of the go-to person for a while answering open meeting law and Public Records Act questions from citizens. The Vermont Legal Cities and Towns will answer it for municipalities, but if a person who has an issue with their town, has questions about open meetings and public records, they would come to me. So I've answered a lot of these questions, and I may have a slightly skewed perspective on the problems out there because all we heard about were the problems. I know the vast majority of municipalities are trying hard. They're often volunteers. They want to comply with the Open Meeting Law and Public Records Act, and they're doing a pretty good job of it. And we help them out whenever we can. Secretary Kondos and I travel the state every other year to go on what we call the Transparency Tour, where we talk about the Open Meeting Law and Public Records Act and try to educate the public so that they understand their right to know, which is really important. I talk a lot about transparency and accountability, and I think transparency in government is the key to rebuilding trust in government. I like to think that we should be working as those 600,000 plus Vermonters are looking over our shoulders when we do our work, and we'll be more accountable that way. As for technology, one good thing that came out of COVID, I think, is more towns have implemented these hybrid meeting systems where they have the cameras, they have the Zoom meetings, they've seen participation go way up. I was just talking to the Richmond town manager the other day on a visit, and they have a really cool setup where they have a big screen, they have cameras that will move around and follow the participants, and people can be either remote or in person. And it's really efficient because they don't have to sit through a long meeting. So more people will sit there, maybe making dinner and then tune in for the part of the meeting that they want to see. Or the road foreman, may pop in when it's time for him to talk about the roads. So this technology has been a great thing. We can take the good parts out of COVID and go forward with more public participation and more transparency in our local governance.
All right, thank you, Chris. Now to Sarah with that question.
So the ability for Vermonters to participate in their local government is very important. And I know that if you'd asked this question 2.5 years ago, it would have been a very different answer, right? We have all learned a lot of new skills about how to allow for people to participate without actually having to get in your car at 6:45 at night and drive down to the town hall for a 7 o'clock meeting. This opportunity that it provides for our citizens to be able to get active and get involved in their local town government is really important. And I think it's something that the Secretary of State's office can do more to support municipalities in giving this access. And I will be the first to admit that it is hard and it is uncomfortable. And how do I know it's hard and uncomfortable? Because in March 2020, we stopped on a dime in the legislature. We went home and we took a week and figured out how to stand up fully transparent committee meetings, House floor sessions, committees of conference, caucus meetings, and how to do that in a way that gave Vermonters the confidence that they know that they can see what's going on in their government. And so I know it's hard. I know it's challenging. I also know that it can be done, and that we should give a lot of support to municipalities in figuring out how to do that. Now, granted, there are a lot of places in Vermont where we're still working on adequate internet access in our town halls. And so in those places, we've got to be a little bit more creative and maybe a little bit more proactive in terms of being able to get them the tools that they need to be able to do this kind of public access. But participation in democracy really requires that we make it easy for citizens to participate, and I would work to do that.
Thank you, Sarah. And to you, John.
Yes, the open records law is something I have a lot of strong opinions about. They might not all be popular. We'll see how it goes. First of all, let's be clear. A government that is not transparent, that is not open to its people, is not a government I would want anywhere near me. And I think that's something we can all agree on. Having said that, as we've seen the Vermont open records law develop, I think there are some places where it should be improved. Obviously, Secretary of State doesn't create policy, but it can be a strong force for making those changes. For one thing, I would like to see a dedicated ombudsperson at the Secretary of State's office. You get a lot of people who need guidance on this in a real direct way, and in some ways a dedicated way, on beyond what somebody could do just sort of as part of a much broader job. And that's going to include sometimes talking about them and explaining to them what the legal remedies might be for them, which would take them to the Attorney General's office, since there's no enforcement really from the Secretary of State's office. Having said that, the other end could use a little work too. I have seen open records requests, and a lot of folks in municipal government, you're gonna know what I'm about to say here. I've seen it weaponized inappropriately, not necessarily for true record search, but just as a form of mischief. And I think the way you reform that end of it is just a tweak of the opportunities that municipalities have for charging for work. I think some of that stuff isn't necessarily entirely well thought through, and there should be maybe a cumulative element to it. But the problem with weaponizing this law is that it actually takes back and causes problems for those who need to use it legitimately. And so I think those sorts of reforms need to happen on both ends of the law. And I think SOS is the place to make that happen and the place to advocate for that in the legislature.
All right, thank you, John. This next question, we're going to start with Sarah. The purview of the Secretary of State's office is pretty wide, so please discuss how you would change or enhance one of the less widely known functions of the office.
That's a great question. And I've already talked a little bit about how I would like to take the Office of Professional Regulation and turn it around to be sort of the Angie's List directory of how Vermonters can find folks who are licensed professionals. I think that another answer to that question would really be around the education and outreach coordinator position. In my opening remarks, I talked about having grown up in a politically diverse family and having been very impacted by my high school social studies teacher, Bruce McLean, who fostered a lot of really healthy debate in class. We have gotten away from having civilized discussions about ideological differences. And as your next Secretary of State, I would reinstitute that position that existed under Deb Markowitz when she was Secretary of State, because I think it's critically important that we get out there and help Vermonters come back to that figurative dinner table where we talk about politics and where we talk about ideological differences. Because at the end of the day, we are all Vermonters. And you know as well as I do that when you're in a snowbank in the dead of night in January, it's your Republican neighbor who might come by and pull you out, right? So if any place in the nation can show us how to get beyond these ideological differences, it's Vermont. And I want the Secretary of State's office to be proactive in getting out there and helping Vermonters have these conversations.
Very good. Thank you, Sarah. Same question to you, John.
Yeah, I hate to do this to you, but could you repeat the question?
Absolutely, I can. The purview of the Secretary of State's office is pretty wide, so please discuss how you would change or enhance one of the less widely known functions of the office.
Well, I'd like to tell you about the archives, but telling you what I'd change and enhance in that would take probably about 15 seconds. So I am going to go back to OPR, to the Office of Professional Regulation. I think I referred to this before. I think the time that we could pretend to the Secretary of State's office is, sort of a technocratic office is long over. I don't think there are any offices that don't need to become a statement, almost an activist organization that creates statement of values. And I think that's where we need to go with the Secretary of State's office. And as I mentioned, the Office of Professional Regulation is an extraordinary vehicle for doing that. I mentioned, pushing out the Equal Pay Compact, but that can only be the beginning. It can be a medium for helping to support businesses by people of color, by women business owners. There is so much that could be done with that resource as a vehicle to promote democratic values that we are not doing. That is actually the most exciting potential part of the job of Secretary of State to me, is I think the possibilities are endless. And in the process, you create a stronger, tighter business community that could work as an element of a stronger, tighter, greater Vermont community. So that's one answer. I could give you more.
Okay, thank you, John. All right, same question to you, Chris.
So there are so many obscure things that we do that people don't even know about. I could talk about amusement rides, or I could talk about data brokers. We could talk about tattooists for a bit. Sarah talked about civics. I really concur with that. And we actually have a position set aside to bring back that civics coordinator. I have talked to Deb Markowitz about this. She's my campaign treasurer. And we've talked about, bringing that education program back. It's another way to defend democracy, is through civics, civil discourse, and media literacy. So I won't talk about that, but we do have the business portal. I mentioned that. There are some things rolling forward in the business portal, and just to touch on what John had said earlier, we'll also be collecting demographics through the business portal. So we'll have more information on the demographics of BIPOC-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, to connect them with the resources that may be available to them, and to provide that information to the legislature so we can drive some good policy. But the one thing that I really want to focus on that's maybe less well known, and I wish it was more well known, is the Safe at Home program, the address confidentiality program, the mail forwarding service that we have for victims of violence, sexual assault, and stalking. It allows them to hide from their abusers. I know that it has saved lives, and more people need to know about it. There's about 200 women and children enrolled in that program at any one time, but I know there are more out there who could use that help. So one of the things I would like us to do, and it is in the works, is to get the word out more, to engage local businesses in participating as liaisons to the program, to help report, to help victims of human trafficking, to bring more light onto the Safe at Home program, to make sure that it's utilized by those who need it.
All right, thank you, Chris. Okay, the next question, we're going to start with John. Should the Secretary of State's office be run in a nonpartisan fashion? Please expand upon your reasoning with examples.
Well, that's a tricky question. I mean, there are things that we do that are by definition nonpartisan. I mean, running elections is not a partisan business. Supporting professional regulation professionals licensing, it's not a partisan business. None of the functions are partisan businesses. So yes, they should not be run in a partisan manner. Having said that, we're not fooling anybody in the sense that you elect a Democrat or a Republican, or a progressive or whatever, you are electing folks to the office under a banner of a party. And that's clear. Democratic Secretary of States, they fundraise for the party, they show up at the party, they are partisans. So the trick is bringing that set of values in that aren't necessarily partisan values, even if they're values that we associate with one party, with the Democratic Party. I think as Secretary of State, I would have a responsibility to reflect those values in what I hope could be an even more values-focused Secretary of State office than we have now. So that is a separate question, even though you get that one thrown back at you. You start talking about expanding opportunities for people of color or women, you get the partisan card thrown back in your face. But none of these values that we should be bringing into the office should be misconstrued or misrepresented as partisan, because the functions of the office are not partisan, and performing them in a thoughtful, meaningful, progressive way should not be a partisan notion.
All right, thank you, John. And next we'll go to Chris for that question.
Thank you. The office absolutely has to be nonpartisan. It has to be a Secretary of State's office for everyone. There are many Republicans and independents in my family. I was raised on the mantra of you vote for the person, not for the party. I was initially appointed by a Republican Secretary of State, and my great uncle was a very conservative legislator. I want to be the Secretary of State for everyone. Their vote matters just as much as any other vote. They need to trust the system, and elections are about trust. And I think being very nonpartisan is part of that. And when it comes to the other side, I can't believe, I believe that you can't write people off. You have to invite them in. You need to speak to them with facts and evidence and common values. The Secretary of State's office has to serve everyone and earn their trust. And every single day, I help people with their problems. I never ask them about their political affiliation when they call me. We're here for everyone. I want to help everyone, and it's imperative for the Secretary of State's office to remain nonpartisan, so that's one other piece of election integrity and trust in elections, is that everyone can trust you to run a free and fair election.
Thank you, Chris. All right, and to you, Sarah.
Thank you. I will say that John and Chris are both right in some of the words that they said in answer to this question. The functions of the office are nonpartisan. The functions of the office need to be open and equally available to everyone. But we have to recognize that everything that we do is happening in a partisan political environment, and especially when it comes to the election side. And so being someone who can operate in a multi-partisan, tripartisan, bipartisan way and still hold true to their values, I think is really important for the position of Secretary of State. And so I talked a little bit about bringing that pension reform process to a unanimous conclusion where Democrats, Republicans, independents, and progressives came together. Is evidence that I know how to bring people together when the time is right for us to come together. I want to talk a little bit also about the reapportionment process. My committee this year led reapportionment. Reapportionment is classically in many parts of the country, and even in Vermont in previous decades, a very partisan and very divisive process. This year, we were under a tremendous time crunch because of the delay in the census data being presented to us, and also because with our second ever universal vote by mail, we needed to have the districts established so that we know how to get the correct ballots to the correct people. We brought the reapportionment process through the legislative process and to a 129-13 conclusion with tripartisan support, with relatively little rancor. And that is because of the leadership that I was able to offer in bringing people together to say, what is the right way to balance out our legislative districts? And so you can do your job, you can do your job well, and you can do it in a way that doesn't offend any partisan entities.
I am muted again. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Sarah. Okay, so for this next question, we're going to start with Chris. And Chris, what more could the Secretary of State's office do to proactively prevent cyber attacks or thefts of information from state infrastructure?
Sure. So my journey in cybersecurity really started when I became the Deputy Secretary of State. And that was right at the beginning of 2016. And we had just learned that the Russians had attempted to infiltrate all of our elections systems, our voter registration databases across the country. They actually did successfully breach one state, Illinois. And so it was at that point that the Department of Homeland Security gave us a call, and I was on the phone with Jim Kondos and Jay Johnson, the secretary at the time, saying, we're declaring election infrastructure critical infrastructure. And we didn't really know what that meant. It did mean that the feds would bring a lot of resources to the table. And it did mean that we had a really rough ride with them for multiple years because they didn't really understand local elections and how they worked, and how the federal government does not have a say over local elections. But they did become our partners over time. As Secretary of State Kondos likes to say, election security, cybersecurity is a race without a finish line. It's constantly evolving. We're constantly having to adapt to stay ahead of it. And we've been leading on election security for a long time. We had an independent assessment from a Vermont company, Department of Defense cleared company. They gave us a roadmap for how to improve all of our defenses. We've been doing that for the last several years. And we've built those relationships with vendors, with Homeland Security, with federal, local, and state law enforcement, so that, again, Vermonters can trust that their systems are secure, their information is secure, and we're defending every single day. I have a secret clearance, and I get occasional briefings in a secure conference facility in Williston, something I never thought I'd do when I started as a staff attorney in the Secretary of State's office 25 years ago. But now I'm an integral part of it. I wrote the elections incident response plan. I've done this work and I know the issues, and I've built the relationships, and can tell you that Vermont is really leading the way on cybersecurity. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris. Same question to you, Sarah.
Thank you. So I really have to send kudos to the current staff and Secretary Kondos for really setting the direction and recognizing that cybersecurity is a critical area of focus for our Secretary of State's office. It is true that we will always be the focus of bad actors who will try to come in, try to hack elections. And I think I will just come back to the fact that we can go back to our paper ballot trail and we can look and see who actually won the election. We can do a physical recount of the entire state of Vermont if we need to. And so I think that there are a lot of safeguards in our paper ballot fallback. And there are also a lot of safeguards that have been developed over the last few years. Chris is right. You know, this is a race without a finish line, and we always need to be vigilant about cybersecurity. I really liked John's idea before of having secure portals that are only available for elections work and that don't connect. Nobody checks email. Nobody possibly opens an attachment and makes a mistake with those. I think the practical implications of doing that in our small municipalities, many of whom operate on a shoestring budget, would really require the investment of time and money from the Secretary of State's office to make that happen. And I would certainly be open to exploring all of those ideas in order to help ensure Vermonters that our systems are safe and secure. And you're
Did it again. I'm so sorry. Okay. John, I know that you were looking forward to this question, so take it away.
Oh, Lord, in 2 minutes. This is a really tough issue because there's a tension between saying we're doing everything we can and talking about the real urgency of the problem and maintaining public confidence in the system. That is a real, and that tension often plays out in offices like Secretaries of State's offices. For example, when I was involved with the University of Chicago initiative, and we were we were actively inviting hackers to get into election systems, there was extraordinary pushback from the National Secretaries of State. There was extraordinary pushback from the industries. And that's because there's a vested interest there in reassuring everyone, don't look here, everything's great. But that means that we can lose sight of things. For example, you can't, it's anytime a state from the Secretary of State's office says, well, there were hack attempts, but we weren't hacked. You don't know what you don't know. That's never a statement you can totally make. Hadn't been someone who's pounded in there. If nothing else, you don't even find about the hacks you do find about for an average of 250 days after the fact. So because of this, security has to be ramped up. We can't just do what we do, traditional security network, every now and then hire somebody like me to penetration test and see where the holes are. The hackers never sleep, we can never sleep. We can't afford to have 24-hour penetration testers trying to stop those hackers. But what we could do is create a new model and develop an open source election management and database system. We could enter the open source community and using that paradigm, and I'm very much involved with election security across the country on this, we could use that paradigm for a far more secure product, a far cheaper product, and a product that then could be scalable and could be a model for jurisdictions around the country and the world. Vermont could lead here. This is not a radical concept. Businesses, bigger businesses, are going the open source route all over the place. And when you look at the companies we are forced to use, in lieu of having our own product, there's a few little companies, they're incredibly opaque. So taking control of that dynamic ourselves would be an enormous step forward that Vermont could take.
All right, thank you, John. Okay, the last question that we're going to ask tonight. What barriers to business development and expansion in Vermont exist and can be addressed through the Secretary of State's office? So for this one, we're starting with Sarah.
Thank you. That's a great question because I think we all know, at least those of us who live in rural parts of the state, that the ability for folks to start and expand their small businesses is really critical to economic development in the rural parts of our state. I've talked a little bit about what I'd like the Office of Professional Regulation to do to help be an Angie's List type portal for Vermonters to be able to find the licensed professional who's operating in their part of the state. I think that offering that way of promotion, that access to customers, that ability to be found by someone who needs your services is a really important and critical way that the Secretary of State's office can help with small business development. You know, what are the other barriers to small business? You know, folks who've never been small business owners oftentimes don't understand how to navigate even the registration of a business name. And so I think offering that ombudsperson who can be the advocate who helps you figure out all of the steps that you need to take in order to open a business in Vermont is a really smart way to go. You know, the Secretary of State's office has classically been very consumer friendly. When you are the licensed professional, you get a reminder email that tells you you need to renew your license. And the link is there and you can go online to do that. And so I think that all of the infrastructure and all of the knowledge is there within the Secretary of State's office to really make that a place where Vermonters can find the professional that they need.
All right, thank you, Sarah. John, the question to you.
Sure, that's a great question. I think, you know, I'm very impressed with what Chris and Jim have done with the business portal. I love Sarah's idea for sort of turning that around and making it go kind of two-way. I do think, and I believe Sarah was mentioning this, that there could be more opportunities to acquaint and maybe reach out to businesses or folks who are considering business so they have a better sense of how to navigate that system. That's always a good thing. But I'm going to go back to the interesting experience I've had having business owners come up and talk to me. And it was entertaining that Chris mentioned tattoo artists, because the first one I heard it from was my tattoo artist. And I got consistently the same kind of thing about small business owners or sole proprietors wanting to feel more involved in the process, in what works, what doesn't work, what the products should do, what they shouldn't do, and specifically what kind of support they need in training. A lot of them feel a little bit too much like they're told what they need, and they'd want to be involved in telling their peers in a more collective partnership way what they need and how they could be supported. So I'd very much go that way. And yeah, I mean, there's only so much that the Secretary of State's office can do, but since it is that point of contact for so many businesses, I think it would be appropriate for the Secretary of State's office to be a champion for small businesses in the legislature. Be a perfect role for that office, and they'd be a perfect place by virtue of having their fingers on that community and on that community's needs.
All right. Well, thank you, John. All right. Last one to you, Chris.
Thank you. And I really appreciate the kudos from Sarah and John about the work our office is doing. One of the big thrills that I have been able to get traveling around the state, talking to business owners in particular, is I asked them, like, how was your experience with our office? How was it to file your LLC? And they're all, to a person, are saying, it was great. It was easy. It was so simple. Can you help me with the planning commission? So that's the experience that people are having, and I'm really glad that they are. Our mission is to reduce barriers, to solve problems, to make it easier for people. And one of the ways that we do that is cutting unnecessary red tape while still protecting the public and fulfilling our government responsibilities. As Democrats, I think we have a responsibility when we're in charge of the levers of government to do it well. And if when we're in charge, we actually use government to solve common problems, to solve the issues that we face together, that's great for us. That's great for the party. More Democrats will get elected. So we take our responsibility in government really seriously to be friendly to everybody that we serve. And the Vermont Business Portal, I'll talk about it again. The next iteration is going to have that two-way street that I think Sarah and John were both talking about, where we can push information out to businesses. They can ask questions from us. We're going to connect in ACCD into that portal as a fourth party. So we can connect them with all the resources that ACCD provides for small businesses. So we can be a facilitator. We can be a clearinghouse of information for small business to make things easier for them, as easy as possible, as easy as it can be in navigating state government.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris. All right. That does wrap it up for questions, and we've covered a lot of ground. But we have reserved time for all of you to finish up our evening to talk about whatever you would like to. So reverse from the introductions. We're going to start with Chris.
So Susan, is this our closing statement, or is there something else beyond?
Yeah, two minutes for closing statements to talk whatever you want.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here tonight. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for these great questions. In about a month, Vermonters are going to begin casting their ballots. So with so many candidates running, you might not hear much about this race, about the Secretary of State's race, but I really urge you to take a closer look. Hopefully tonight gave you some sense of all of the things that the Secretary of State's office is responsible for. Registering businesses, preserving our state archives, protecting the public, professional regulation, assisting municipalities, campaign finance, lobbyist disclosures, and overseeing Vermont's elections and protecting that most valuable right, the right to vote. Our office is diverse and it's complicated. We have 80 employees and a $17 million budget. So it requires an experienced and hardworking manager to run it. A well-run Secretary of State's office makes Vermonters' lives better. And without the right person in charge, Vermont will see an immediate impact in public safety, in the economy, in government transparency, and even in democracy itself. I'm running for Secretary of State to make sure our elections are safe and secure, our voters have access to voting in their government, our businesses have the supports that they need, that our office is transparent, it's responsive, it's helpful at all times to all Vermonters. And when I say these things, they aren't just talking points for me, they're deliverables. As Deputy Secretary to Jim Condos for the last 7 years, I've delivered on these promises time and time again. And I'll bring my hard-earned experience and my knowledge of the office to the top job. I want to ensure stability and continuity at a time when conducting elections and running a state agency has gotten more complicated than ever, at a time when it feels like everything we thought to be true is constantly changing. I've worked hard for our #1 state ranking in elections performance, our nationally recognized system of professional regulation, and I fought for things like the creation of an ethics commission, a one-stop business portal, and I've been a very strong advocate for the public's right to know. In these uncertain times, I believe Vermonters want security, stability, and an experienced leader they can trust. I'm ready to lead on day one, and I'm asking for your vote. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you. John, to you.
Hard to decide what to stay and focus on. I could restate everything we've already said, but how boring would that be? So let me relay a story that has been sitting in my craw a while ago. A little ways back, I think Chris was up there. We were at the Maple Fest in St. Albans, and I had a couple people holding my banner and a couple young kids going ahead of us, one of them doing these very dramatic gymnastic flips. It was great. It was great until somebody called out from the crowd and called her the N-word. You know, this is a difficult kind of thing for, I think, us white lefties to talk about because it's so easy for us to make it about ourselves. But I will say that I was responsible for putting her in that position, but and that was terrible. But it's just another reminder that we overestimate ourselves in Vermont as to how far we have to go on that. So I was kind of wrecked the next day, but I strained my brain. How could the Secretary of State's office step up and make a statement, do something about racism here? And it's limited. There's a limited amount we can do. And I think I spoke some about having a values-driven Secretary of State's office. That's very much what I'm running on. But I also think representation and visuals matter. So if I am Secretary of State, I am committing, should the deputy position open up, to appoint a person of color to that position. I think it could be an extraordinary opportunity for so many Vermonters to much more see themselves, reflected in one of the state's most prominent positions, rather than, continuing to feel that it's not their state, as so many who I've talked to. And I've heard some stories, we all probably have, but so many who feel that way. So that's a promise I would just like to make now. And I give you a little background as to why it occurred to me in the first place. Thanks. And thanks for having me.
Well, thank you, John. And Sarah, 2 minutes for you.
Thank you. And thank you so much to the Windsor County Dems for putting on this forum tonight. This has been really valuable. Now more than ever, electing champions of democracy is crucial. And I'm running for Secretary of State to strengthen democracy and ensure that all Vermonters can have their voices heard in Vermont elections. As your next Secretary of State, I will continue to lead the charge in strengthening and preserving democracy. And I am a proven leader who's never shied away from hard work and complex issues. In addition to my work strengthening Vermont's democracy, I also have set Vermont on a path to achieve the greenhouse gas reduction milestones that we all know we need to in order to pass a livable planet on to our children. My work has helped to bring Vermont one step closer to reproductive liberty for all. We've guaranteed paid sick days for Vermont workers. And my work has been integrally involved in setting up a cannabis market that ensures consumer safety, youth prevention, and also prioritizes restoring historical harms. My work has passed the strongest sexual harassment prevention legislation. I've also worked very hard on modernizing our sexual assault statutes so that consent can be defined. I am a proven leader, and I think that Vermont needs a Secretary of State. In fact, Vermont deserves a Secretary of State who wakes up every morning looking for ways to solve these problems for the future of Vermont.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to all of you. I would really like to extend my sincere appreciation to all three of you for running for office and for all of the contributions that you've already made in the roles that you've been in. You're all amazing, and you're working hard for Vermonters every day, and we appreciate you. So thank you for joining us this evening on Zoom, and thank you to everyone who joined us on YouTube. If you found this evening's event helpful and informative, I would ask you again, please follow the link in the description to donate to the Windsor County Democratic Committee. Your donation will help us to ensure that Democrats and those who will uphold, defend, and ensure our values and rights are elected up and down the ballot in November. So please join us again on June 6th, when we'll be joined with by the candidates for Windsor County Senate. And again on June 13th for a forum with the Vermont candidates for the U.S. Senate. Stay safe, everyone, and good night.
Thanks, Susan.
Good night.
Okay, we are no